And of course, the kind of challenges we're seeing in that community among those that have been listed as economic challenges, including high unemployment that lead to persistent inequality. South Africa consistently ranked among the major countries facing risks. These are some of the findings of the Institute of Risk Management South Africa's annual risk report. Nicola Comninos is CFA Purple Group Chief Risk Officer. Nicola, good evening to you. Thank you for your time tonight. Firstly, you're talking about a polycrisis that South Africa is set to be facing here. What is a polycrisis?
Hi, good evening, Kathy. Great to be talking to you tonight. Yes, look, very, very challenging circumstances in a nutshell. But in essence, what we're talking about when we mention a polycrisis in this report is really multiple crises materializing simultaneously in quick succession, complex in nature, and having interrelated risks, as well as risks spread across a whole variety of different types and categories, and really also across the scope in different levels, locally, internationally, regionally, and so that really is in a nutshell, what we're talking about here. Multiple risks, fast, complex, and all interconnected, and that's really in a nutshell, what we're referring to.
The role of protests as an indicator of just how volatile things are?
No, definitely. Look, I mean, there are multiple indicators, multiple elements that can be identified. If I look at the risk report that we launched yesterday, the 9th edition of the risk report that the Institute has launched, we have a whole host of risks that we've identified, 9 of them in particular, and we've linked those to the 6 government priorities. One of them that we've identified in there, which is linked to the government priority of making communities safer, is essentially things like the collapse of the social security system. And we could very well see a lot of protest action relating to that, to the unemployment, which is another risk identified, livelihood crisis, which is another risk identified in the report, political instability, and systemic failure of public enterprises, public infrastructure, and last but not least, the national grid failure being one of the top risks. All of those, which we could see essentially a whole host of action, protest action related to.
It's interesting because one of the things that we are starting to hear more and more often is this risk of South Africa becoming a failed state. It's something that you talk about in the report as well, and I'm keen to know sort of the definition that you would be using for this particular criteria.
So that really goes back to, Kathy, your opening remarks around the polycrisis, and that's how we've linked it, is saying we can see South Africa in the situation and being defined as a failed state if we do indeed see the polycrisis becoming a reality. And other words, all of those risks essentially materializing at the same time. National grid failure, illicit economic activity continuing, economic collapse, large-scale disruption of digitally enabled services, impact of climate change, and the others that I've mentioned, social security system collapsing, the failure of public infrastructure, etc. And that in itself is essentially culminating in what we're referring to as a failed state, which also in the report is referred to as a mafia state. So essentially saying things are just outside of control, have gone out of control, and we have to bring it back into the fold of governance and construct and taking action to pull it all together.
For those who might read the research and think, perhaps, you're blowing things out of proportion. Yes, the situation is bad, but not that bad.
No, exactly. Look, Kathy, it's a risk report. And so what we as risk managers do is we look into the future and we say, what are the things that can happen? What is the worst case scenario? We look at it, we do a threat assessment. We essentially say, what are the things that can go wrong? And essentially, it's a call to action to say to all business leaders, let's make sure that this does not happen. So we certainly don't want to predict the future. We want to be wrong in what we've put in the report. We want to focus our readers really on the section. We've included 11 call to action items in there, which is not just for risk managers. It's for all business leaders, irrespective of your role. And I don't have enough time to take you through all of those, but just highlighting a couple of those that are really close to my heart, in particular working for a fintech startup group, Purple Group. We're listed on the JSE. We've only been around for about 20 years. We've got businesses like Easy Equities in our group, which has been around for less than 10 years. So one of the call to actions is we need to support entrepreneurs. So we do that in Purple Group. Other businesses have to do it similarly. Support our small, medium, micro enterprises, support innovation, research and development, so we can make our country more competitive. These are some of the things that can help us make sure that polycrisis does not materialize, that risk of a failed state does not materialize. Things like strengthening the rule of law, protecting our whistleblower interests, people supporting organizations like Whistleblowers House, the wonderful work that Cynthia Stimple is doing, and other whistleblowers. Things like looking at climate change and how that's going to impact, and skills we have to build and job creation around that to protect our biodiversity and to protect our nature. And then last but not least, IRMSA released last year our integrated strategy, risk and resilience guideline. And then in all as business leaders embracing that and making sure that we don't just think about strategy, new business growth. We think about the risks. We think about how we can make our businesses more resilient, how we can make our businesses more robust. So using those types of things, using those guidelines, we're a non-profit organization, but we want to influence the change, and we encourage everyone through this report to lead the change exactly where you stand.
All right, let's leave it there for today. Nicola Comninos, CFA Purple Group Chief Risk Officer.